Leon is a miserable gaming addict who accidentally dies and wakes up in a dating game where women rule the world. However, everything changes when he uses his cheat gaming skills to become an overpowered knight, so he can riz all the baddies and crack everyone. It all began with our guy playing a dating sim game in which women reign supreme, and even though he hated it, he still had to clear it because his sister blackmailed him into playing it. After 3 days of endless gaming, he finally cleared the game, and when he stepped out to get some food, he fell from the stairs and died. However, instead of going to the pearly gates, he was isekai'd into the game as the third son of a broke baron, whose stepmom treated him worse than trash since men were second-class citizens inside the game. 10 years after surviving the trashy game, his evil stepmother suddenly informed him that she found him a wife. Leon obviously protested because the so-called bride was an extra large human horror show that had been married 7 times, and she took her previous husband's breath away when she sat on their faces. Leon argued that he wanted to attend the Magic Academy and find a wife, but the woman said if he wasn't going to marry the ugly sugar mummy, he would have to join the military and hopefully die in action. She then gave him a smug smile which made it very clear which option she preferred, and that pissed Leon off even more. After the insufferable woman left, Leon told his father that he needed his help to get out of his sticky situation. The next day, Leon set off on a ship to find the legendary ship he bought for the protagonist while playing the game. When he arrived at the location, he got swept up by a tornado and was convinced he was going to die. However, he was saved by the power of plot armor and even found the ship's location. When he went inside, he encountered a robot guarding the ship who deemed him an intruder and tried to unalive him, but Leon wasn't about to return empty-handed. After getting beat up, Leon took his sword, which was detachable for some reason, and shot it in the bot's face, causing it to short-circuit. He then walked into the control room and placed his hand on the panel as he ignored the ship's very own Jarvis telling him to leave. Almost immediately, it acknowledged him as its commander, and Leon decided to name it Luxian. However, his battle with the bot had left him with severe internal injuries, and as he began losing consciousness, Leon hoped that he would be reborn in a world with elf baddies. 3 months later, Leon still hadn't returned home, and his stepmother said he had either run away or was dead in a ditch somewhere. Leon's father refused to believe that his son was dead, and just then, they heard a ship approaching the estate. Curious, they all rushed outside and were surprised to find Leon piloting a lost relic filled with so much ice that Nami would ditch the Strowitz to join his crew. His stepmother was livid, but Leon smiled wickedly at her because now he was richer than Elon, and she could no longer control his life. Apart from the gold, no gold digger could ever finish digging. He'd also discovered an uninhabited floating island, cleared an unexplored dungeon, so he was granted a barony, which meant that he had to find a high-ranking wife like his stepmom at the academy. But all our guy wanted to do was reclaim his spot as background character number 1, so he lamented his rotten luck. Nevertheless, he enrolled at the academy, using his money, and wasn't surprised to see that it matched the academy from the game to a T. And once again, his hatred for that world returned in full, especially when he saw the prince and his gang of pretty boys rolling in like they owned the place. The game's antagonist, Angelica, was also there, and from what Leon recalled, she hated the protagonist because she stole the prince with just her smile and kind heart. However, he'd already decided that he was going to avoid that whole gang like they carried the Black Plague because he was a mob character. On his way to his dorm later, he happened to witness the first game event play out between the prince and the protagonist, but quickly realized that something was off because the girl acting as the protagonist was different. She also seemed very familiar to him, but he couldn't recall where he'd seen her before. Days later, Leon sat in the garden with his loser friends Daniel and Raymond, as the trio lamented their inability to riz girls into attending their tea parties. Just then, they heard some girls squealing and turned to find them gathered around the prince, Julius. Apparently, he was hosting a tea party, and everyone wanted to be invited, but the only person Julius was interested in inviting was Mary, the new protagonist. When Angelica realized this, she got pissed and warned Julius not to drop his rep for a plotless lolly. Julius told her that being his fiancé didn't give her the right to meddle in his affairs, so she apologized, but the guy ignored her. Instead, he turned to Marie and practically begged her to come to his tea party, prompting Jilk, his right-hand man, to tease him. Julius didn't really care, as he was in his simp era, and grew even happier when Mary accepted his invitation. Leon, watching the scene unfold, couldn't help but wonder why the plot was changing. Later in class, Leon zoned out while the teacher was teaching about tea parties, and the man called him out. However, when he realized that Leon wasn't the least bit interested in the whole team party craze, he asked him to come up front. By the end of the class, Leon had become a tea party enthusiast, and he began addressing his teacher as master. Daniel and Raymond just stared at him, wondering if he'd been body snatched, but Leon didn't even notice. A few days later, he hosted his first tea party, and unfortunately, the Baron's daughter, whom he'd invited, brought her ugly posies. The worst part was that she didn't even enter the tea room, so Leon was left to wait on her rude friends. After they ate all he had prepared, they left to attend the tea party being hosted by Brad, another one of Julius's friends. The ugly ducklings even dared to say that Leon should have bought more snacks, and the boy grew livid. However, for the sake of his master, he decided to stomach it. Suddenly, he heard voices in the hallway, and when he and Luxian went to investigate, they found Olivia, the real protagonist, being bullied. Leon didn't want to interfere, but seeing how pitiful she looked, pushed him to invite her to his tea party. And unlike the three ungrateful brats he catered to earlier, Olivia was nice, was a better guest, and she appreciated everything he served up. Watching her made Leon understand why the prince and his friends fell for her, so he apologized in his head for cursing her out while playing the game. He then asked why the other girls had picked on her, and Olivia explained that it was because she was a commoner and a scholarship student. She also said she didn't understand the academy's unspoken rules, and when she started crying, he freaked out. He quickly calmed her down and told her that he knew someone who could help change her fate, and Olivia lit up like a Christmas tree. The person he told her about was his older sister, Jenna, and even though they hated each other, she was willing to help Olivia. She told her to introduce herself to the most popular girl in her class and bring her snacks from one of those fancy stores. Olivia began shaking after hearing this since she was the ambassador for the Broke Girls Association, but Jenna told Leon to pay for the snacks. He immediately protested, but did it anyway, and Olivia got to present the snacks to Angelica. She then asked Angelica if she could remain at the academy, and Angelica admitted she wasn't involved in the bullying. In fact, she hated the way the students at the academy often behaved, but believed that Olivia was better than that goody-two-shoes Mari who had turned Julius into her boy toy. Curious, Angelica asked Olivia who had advised her to approach her, and Olivia told her it was Leon. Angelica was impressed, and even more so when Olivia began glazing Leon. However, she hoped that people wouldn't try to take advantage of his competence. The following day, the students went to the dungeons for their exploration class, but Leon quickly noticed that everyone was willing to use him and Olivia as meat shields. It didn't really bother him because everyone had haters, and just as they were about to set off, a commotion broke out. It was between Julius and Angelica, and as you guessed, it was because of Mary. In the end, Julius screamed at Angelica to back off, and his friends told her to stop acting like a desperate hoe, leaving Angelica feeling utterly humiliated. Later, while Leon and Olivia were harvesting crystals, they were ambushed by monsters, but Leon easily fought them off. Unfortunately, he got bitten by a hairy monster that tried to attack Olivia, but he still managed to get rid of it. The next moment, Julius and his friends showed up and started aura farming to impress Mari, which pissed Leon off. After the battle, Mari noticed Julius was injured, so she used healing magic on him, but she signaled for him not to tell anyone. When poor Angelica rushed over to check on him, Julius was rude to her and walked off, holding Mary's hand, prompting the other students to gossip that Angelica had been publicly dumped. As for Leon, Olivia healed him, but he couldn't help but wonder what Mary's game was because he knew she wasn't part of the plot. Later that week, some girls threw Mary's bag and books into the incinerator, but Julius blamed Angelica for it. He also issued a verbal restraining order against her, and the girl was left even more heartbroken than before. Meanwhile, Leon was in his room with his friends discussing how they were probably going to end up married to rich snubs who would treat them worse than garbage. However, the conversation soon shifted to Mari and the bullying she was facing from Angelica's followers. When Daniel and Raymond mentioned that Julius was angry at Angelica because of it, Leon recalled that it had happened in the game as well. However, the time frame was different, which further convinced him that Mary was a scheming brat. So, when he met Olivia in the library later, he asked her to tell him about Mary. Olivia assumed he was asking because he had a crush on the girl, and Leon's face instantly morphed into a picture of disgust as he declared just how much he hated that vertically challenged lowly. Olivia quickly apologized, saying she had only spoken to Mary once, but the girl had been rude. She told Olivia that she hated girls like her the most, leaving Olivia feeling sad. Leon repeated the statement in his head as the phrasing felt very off, but before he could decipher it, they heard a sound somewhere in the quiet library. It was then followed by a girl whispering to her companion that they were in the library, but her companion said it didn't matter. As a nosy busybody, Leon immediately went to investigate, ignoring Olivia, who pointed out that he was about to invade people's privacy. However, she was utterly shocked to see that the couple was Mary and Brad. Later, as Mary left the library, she smiled victoriously and told herself that she was having way too much fun. Because, as Leon suspected, the girl was manipulating Julius and his friend. Her happy moment was interrupted by Julius and Jilk, but she was a professional actress, so she didn't give herself away when she turned to speak to them. The prince told her that they were going to get her a personal servant because they didn't want her to be lonely. Outwardly, Mari was appreciative, but inwardly, she was pleased that the gullible heirs were taking such good care of her. As she trailed behind them, she told herself that she was going to enjoy all the perks of being in an otome game, making it clear that she was also isekai'd. That night, while Leon slept, Jenna barged into his room and demanded to know whether he knew Marie. Leon pointed out that the girl was the Academy's trending topic, and Jenna warned him not to get involved with her. She also told him to stay clear of Angelica and Julius because getting on the future king's bad side could cost him his future. Leon assured her that he wasn't that stupid, but Jenna trusted his words as much as fans now trust Gege Akutami to keep his characters alive. After she left, Leon lay back, and Lucian came to tell him what he'd learned about Angelica and Mari. Days later, the Academy held a party where Leon and his friends hoped they would score points with some backwoods noble girls. Unfortunately, the girls humiliated them and had their servants beat them up for even daring to approach them. Before they could recover, Olivia found Leon and told him there was an emergency. The emergency was Angelica, who was engaged in another argument with Julius over Mary. She had told him that Mary was involved with his entire friend group, but the Crown Prince didn't care. In fact, he already knew, and his friends shamelessly admitted they loved Mary too, but Julius claimed he loved her the most. Hearing his declaration, Angelica realized that Julius planned to keep seeing Marie regardless of their engagement, and the prince confirmed it, saying Marie was irreplaceable. The other girls swooned at his declaration, wishing he had said that about them, but that only fueled Angelica's anger. So she took off her glove and threw it at Marie, challenging her to a duel. Leon had expected this since the same thing had happened in the game, and, just as in the game, Julius and his friends volunteered to be Marie's champions. Angelica was then left seeking a champion because no one wanted to go up against Julius and his friends, for obvious reasons. Leon knew that Angelica would be ruined after losing the duel, and despite his desire to live a life in the shadows, he stepped forward and volunteered to be Angelica's champion. He then turned to Julius's group and told them that their duel would follow the normal rules. Marie kept her face neutral, but Leon saw through it because Lucian had helped him confirm that she'd been reincarnated like him, so he was going to mess up her plans. He asked Angelica what her demands were, and she said she wanted Marie to stay away from Julius if she won. Julius told her that her demands screamed desperation, but Leon, not so respectfully, told him to shut up and asked what Marie's demands were. The girl put on a pitiful act, and, just as Leon expected, she parroted what the real protagonist had said in that scene, asking Angelica to be nicer to her. Leon then decided that the duel would be held in the school arena, but Chris pointed out that Leon was outnumbered. Leon assured him that he wouldn't lose, but Greg argued that he was only trying to act tough to gain attention. That statement prompted Leon to exchange a few words with Greg, leaving the pompous brat feeling insulted. Before things could escalate, Brad cut in and tried to convince Leon to find 4 other teammates, but the boy refused. The following day, Leon's room was graffitied, and Luxian showed him that the students had made Daniel and Raymond do it. Aside from that, the students were placing bets against Leon, but he didn't care, and even decided to bet on himself. Shortly after that, he went to speak with Angelica, and she asked him to forfeit the duel, but he refused, saying this was his only shot at leaving the academy for good. Angelica thought he was crazy, but Leon didn't care and assured her that he wouldn't lose. On the day of the duel, Leon stepped into the arena after suiting up and was impressed to see that Julius and his friends wore top-notch, fancy armor. When the students began cheering them on, but cursing Leon, the thick-skinned boy flipped them off and asked Lux to bring in his amour. When it landed, everyone burst out laughing, but Leon just smiled smugly at Julius. Olivia didn't understand why everyone was laughing, so Angelica explained that Leon's armor was a lost item. The technology used to make it had long since been lost, and the newer armors had been designed with speed as their benchmark. In other words, Leon's armor was a piece of junk that would get knocked out in the first round, so she couldn't understand why he was using it. Eventually, Leon got into his armor's cockpit, and after activating it, he saw that his first opponent was Brad. However, thanks to his knowledge of the game, he knew the stats of Brad's armor and vowed to get his revenge because of how much trouble Brad caused him while he played the game. Brad soon began bragging, but Leon shut him down faster than your crush could reject you, and that pissed the guy off. Luxian then pointed out that Brad had drone-like weapons on his back and asked Leon if he should prepare a countermeasure. Leon told him not to bother and just asked him to deploy his weapon, only to find it was a shovel. Luxian explained that they had switched out the weapon when they went digging on his island the other day. Leon complained about Luxian's incompetence, but since he couldn't really do anything, he decided to make do with the shovel. At this point, the students were already laughing at him again, and Brad accused Leon of trying to mock him, but Leon assured him that he wasn't that relevant. Shortly after, the duel began, and Brad attacked first, trying to prove he had the superior armor. However, Leon knocked him unconscious in under 30 seconds, causing the arena to become as silent as a cemetery. Leon was also surprised by the outcome, so he asked Luxian if he'd taken revenge on Brad for calling their amour outdated. The AI didn't respond, and Leon got distracted by his master, who was the only one who clapped for him. Everyone else was still very confused, and instead of trying to figure out what happened, Angelica started laughing. She told Olivia that Leon was one crazy fellow, but Olivia defended him. On the other hand, Julius and his friends concluded that Leon had been so confident because he knew his armor was strong, but Greg believed it was no match for him. When he stepped onto the ring, he swore that he'd bring Leon and his armor down. Luxian spotted a few patches on Greg's armor, making it clear that the guy had been in a few combats. Leon said it was because the guy was a hot-headed idiot, and Greg proved it by starting a verbal fight with Leon. Of course, Leon clapped back, which pissed Greg off, so he immediately attacked when the ref gave the signal. Leon easily defended himself, using his shovel, and when he got tired of that, he blessed Greg with his chest cannon, after which he began whacking him every which way until he fell to the ground. However, he wasn't done with him and ripped off his armor's arm and leg while talking down at him. His words added an extra layer of humiliation to Greg, so he came out of his armor and attempted to finish the fight with a broken piece of his armor. But Leon was petty as hell, so he kept mocking Greg, calling him a pathetic weakling and saying the guy lacked self-awareness. Greg argued that Leon was wrong, but Leon wasn't done with him, and the things he said destroyed Greg's self-esteem. His pitiful attempt at fighting back left everyone feeling sorry for him, and even Olivia pointed out that Leon had stooped very low. Soon, it was Chris's turn to duel against Leon, and he promised that he wouldn't underestimate Leon as his friends did. Leon thanked him and assured him he would return the energy, recalling that Chris was a master swordsman. Immediately, the duel began. Chris moved in to attack, but Leon put some distance between them and deployed his drones. Chris complained that Leon was fighting dirty, but Leon pointed out that shooting wasn't against the rules. Enraged, Chris tried to finish Leon off with a classic one-strike move, but Leon caught and broke his blade easily. At this, Chris fell to his knees in defeat and began asking how he'd lost when he worked harder than the others. Leon suggested that he go cry to Marie so she would take pity on him, and Luxin immediately called him a scumbag for saying so. Leon didn't really care, but admitted he felt bad for saying it. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done, and the number of his hate club was rising by the second. Jill couldn't believe that Leon had won all 3 matches, and as Julius's right hand, he felt it was his duty to protect his honor at all costs. So he roped Jenna into his schemes and had her trick Angelica and Olivia so she could rig Leon's armor. When the girls found Leon later, they told him that Jenna had sent them because she was worried about him, and Leon immediately clocked that the girls were up to something. After Angelica and Olivia left, Luxin uncloaked himself and informed Leon that Jenna had put magic bombs on the back of his armor. He confirmed that Jill had put her up to it, but Leon wasn't worried because his armor wasn't like the new models. A few minutes later, he stood facing Jilk in the ring, and the boy dared to act honorably. Leon played along, and when the duel began, Jilk fired a smoke bomb and flew into the air, where he remained as he shot Leon. However, when the smoke cleared, he was surprised to find Leon unharmed, so he decided to activate the bombs Jenna had planned for him. Still, Leon escaped without a scratch and flew up to even the playing field. When he struck Jilk, the guy stepped back and asked Leon why he was hell-bent on fighting Julius, even though he knew it would cost him his social standing. Leon replied that that was what he wanted and said he was willing to do anything to achieve it, just as Jilk had done. For some reason, Jilk assumed Leon wanted Julius dead, so he swore that he would make Leo's family pay. At this, Leon asked why he was threatening him and said he would love to hear how Julius felt about his guy threatening his citizens. Jilk argued that Julius wouldn't believe him, so Leon had Luxin play a recording of Jilk's statement, and the guy went cold. Leon then called Jilk a coward, which pissed him off so much that he recklessly swung at Leon and ended up getting knocked down. Jenna got pissed when she saw this, while Mari was on the verge of breaking character until Julius called to her. He promised he would win the duel, and Mari had to pretend as if she believed him, because that was the only thing she could do. After Julius got in the ring, everyone cheered for him, and he told Leon that he respected how hard he'd fought. Leon acknowledged that Julius had the strongest armor amongst his friend group, but Luxin assured him that it wasn't strong enough to bring them down. So when they clashed with Julius, they easily defended themselves, ignoring the jabs from the students who told Leon to just lose already. At some point, he began trash-talking Julius, and even said that Julius's defeat would allow his friends to get even closer to his beloved Mari. He then asked Julius if he felt that he was being fair to Angelica, who loved him more than she loved herself. Julius argued that what Angelica felt for him wasn't love and that Mari was the only person who truly loved him. After saying this, he charged at Leon again, but the boy defended himself and told Julius that he was a fool who couldn't see that Mari was playing him. At this, Julius told him to stop lecturing him and said that he was only mouthing off because he had strong armor. Leon didn't even deny it and asked Julius how it felt to be humiliated by someone who was beneath him in every way. Enraged, Julius tried to strike him again, but Leon defended himself and told His Royal Highness to piss off. Julius had said earlier on that he didn't want to be born into royalty, so Leon referenced it and said Julius was nothing but a hypocrite. Using himself as an example, he told Julius that he had never gone through humiliation and would never know what it felt like to be part of the bottom-tier community. Still, Julius didn't care and swore that the duel would only end after one of them died because he'd rather die than be separated from Mari. His declaration made Angelica realize just how insignificant she was to Julius, and she began to cry. Seeing this, Olivia spoke up and told the prince that even though he didn't love Angelica, it didn't mean that what Angelica felt for him wasn't real. Her voice carried through the arena, and while Leon was impressed by her bravery, Mari was pissed that she was interfering with her plans even though she had stolen her place. On the other hand, the completely brainwashed prince argued that Olivia was just as delusional as Angelica. He was convinced that the only person who truly loved him was Mari, so he told Angelica to stay as far away from him as possible. At this point, Leon was convinced Julius needed a rude awakening, so he ramped up his trash talk, intentionally pissing Julius off. He also successfully pissed off the entire student body, but he didn't care, as he hoped his words would snap Julius back to his senses. Spoiler alert, it didn't, so when Julius charged at him, he disarmed him, gripped his arms tightly, and asked what he'd do if he were stripped of his title. Julius answered that he wouldn't care because it would allow him to love Mari freely, and that was when Leon realized that the guy was beyond saving. So, he asked Lucian to blast Julius once he confirmed that the guy would survive the attack. Everyone was shocked to see that Julius lost and cursed at Leon when he came out of his armor to speak with Angelica. She thanked him for helping her with the matter, and after she walked away, Olivia expressed concern that Leon was now public enemy number one. Leon assured her that he didn't mind, then revealed he'd expected the backlash and was leaving the academy, which shocked her. The next day, Angelica visited Julius and, during their discussion, asked why he couldn't love her back. Julius said it was because she didn't know the real him, and he admitted that, even though his actions towards her and her family were rude, he wouldn't go back on his decision. Angelica was completely broken after listening to him, but she wished him the best and left him alone. Meanwhile, Leon was in a meeting with her father and his right-hand man. He played the role of a patriotic citizen, claiming that he'd taken on the duel because he could see that the prize was being led astray by Marie. He also pleaded with Angelica's father to help him ensure that his family wouldn't be punished for his mistake, and he revoked his knighthood and title to prove his sincerity. As a duke, Angelica's father gave Leon his word and asked him to take his daughter home for the holidays, believing that a new environment could help mend her broken heart. During the trip, Angelica blamed herself for ruining Leon's life for a man who didn't even care about her. Olivia assured her that what happened to Leon wasn't her fault, but Angelica continued blaming herself. Leon happened to overhear them, and when Luxin suggested that he go talk to them, he refused because he knew he couldn't console women. Shortly before they arrived at his family estate, his stepmom went to scream at his parents, saying they had raised a useless son. His father couldn't even defend him and was about to get chewed out by his wife when Angelica walked in. The woman had no idea who she was and spoke to her rudely until Angelica introduced herself as the Duke of Redgrave's daughter. She immediately straightened up and excused herself, causing Leon to cry tears of joy because it was the first time in his life that he'd seen the vile woman so afraid. Angelica apologized to Leon for having to grow up with such an evil woman, but the boy didn't care. Later, he took the girls to his island and let them use the hot spring he made there. After their bath, he joined them, and while they were chatting, Angelica admitted that she wished she could get revenge on Julius and Marie. Leon told her she could and said the best form of revenge was to become happy. Angelica hadn't expected that, but Leon explained that trying to make someone else unhappy was a complete waste of time. His words made a lot of sense, so Olivia promised Angelica that she would help her heal. Seeing them bond made Leon feel sorry for the spiteful Marie, who at that moment just discovered that her harem of rich brats had all been disinherited. The boys weren't the least bit bothered by it and began talking about how they needed to get revenge on Leon, and how they were going to be adventuring so they could also find lost items and make some money to support themselves. Marie felt her world come crashing down, and as she began crying, the dumb boys assumed it was tears of joy. The following day, Leon was informed that he would be granted a formal title in recognition of his efforts to set the former crown prince straight. Leon couldn't believe his luck, but he also couldn't refuse the title, so he appeared before the king and queen a few days later. And when the new semester resumed, he returned to the academy because his new title revoked his expulsion. Luxin then informed him that Julius's group had become adventurers and were all having fun except for Mary. That last part made Leon extremely happy, but he quickly masked his joy when Angelica and Olivia came to find him and pulled him along. Sometime later, the students began planning their school festival, and Leon roped his friends into setting up a cafe. However, Julius and his friends set one up next door, and Olivia was completely floored when she saw how much the pretty boys were charging for tea and sweets. She pointed out that it was expensive, but Leon reminded her that she wasn't their target audience and told her to just ignore the cafe. This prompted Julius to say they were fully prepared to take on Leon and wouldn't lose to him again. As he began walking away, Leon followed him, and when Julius questioned him, he said he was only checking out his cafe. To his surprise, the place resembled a host club, and each boy was even dressed as a host. Leon's reaction made them assume he was afraid, but he told them they were just a bunch of posh fools. Looking around again, Olivia pointed out the similarities between the cafe and a bar, and that was when Marie made her presence known. She claimed that as former heirs, the boys ought to carry themselves with class, but Leon told her she was just using their popularity to her advantage. The girl didn't deny it and asked if he would interfere with her plans again. In response, Leon began mocking her because the cafe was called Cafe Princess, and he was convinced she was delusional enough to call herself a princess. Mari argued that she was a princess at heart, and her boys fed her ego by saying she was and would always be a princess to them. She then promised Leon that no one would visit his cafe during the festival, so he should prepare to serve them, as they would use it as their break room. The next day, the festival began, and while Olivia was out trying to get customers, some girls were mean to her. One said that Leon's liking her had made her forget she was no different from an alley rat, but her friend cautioned her to be mindful of her words. She reminded her that Angelica also liked Olivia, and that unless she wanted her family ruined, she had better leave Olivia alone. After they walked away, Olivia felt sad, but then a girl named Carla approached her, and her mood lifted. Later, Angelica was informed that her presence was needed, and to her surprise, she discovered it was the queen, Mylene, who needed her. As they walked around, the queen told her that she'd come to see Leon because of what happened during the duel and apologized to Angelica on her son's behalf. Angelica told her not to and said if anyone should apologize, it ought to be her because it was her challenge that cost Julius his title. Mylene disagreed, saying it was her son's fault for being a dense fool. Meanwhile, Olivia and Leon watched as Cafe Princess drew a large crowd while their cafe was hosting a cricket orchestra. Suddenly, a girl named Stephanie arrived with her servants and told Leon she wanted a table. A few minutes later, Mylene and Angelica arrived at the cafe and witnessed Stephanie acting like a cliché mean girl. She claimed her tea was lukewarm and threw it in Leon's face. When he bent to pick up the broken pieces of the cup, she stomped on his head and demanded a refund, but Leon refused. His response pissed her off, so she began insulting him even more. Angelica soon reached her limit, so she walked up to Stephanie and grabbed her by the shirt, demanding to know whether her lack of manners was hereditary. She also asked her to leave, but Stephanie laughed and mocked her, saying she was nothing more than the prince's leftovers. When Stephanie wouldn't shut up, Olivia asked her to leave, but then Stephanie turned on her. She reminded her that she was a charity case and said Angelica saw her only as a pet. Her words made Olivia look at Angelica differently. However, it just pissed Leon off, and when he told Stephanie to shut up, one of her servants slapped him. Seeing this, Mylene decided to step in, but Stephanie, who had no idea who she was, began speaking to her rudely. Angelica tried to warn her, but then she sensed the change in Leon's aura and realized that the boy was about to abuse his power. She tried to convince him to calm down, but he was too far gone and began beating up Stephanie's servants. When Stephanie demanded to know what gave him the right to strike her servants, he happily revealed Mylene's identity as the queen, and she froze. But he didn't stop there and promised Stephanie that her rudeness had just cost her family everything. Mylene tried to calm him down, but Leon was having way too much fun and kept beating up the guys until Angelica called his master to warn him. After the man left to prepare tea, Leon apologized to Mylene, but then Angelica pointed out to the queen that the boy was actually messing with her. Eventually, he apologized sincerely, and she explained that she had come to see him because his actions during the duel were questionable. Not only that, but it had earned him many enemies in court, which was very detrimental to his future. But Leon assured her that having a few haters never hurt anyone. At this, the queen dropped the subject and shyly asked if he could help her create memories, since she had come from a neighboring kingdom and had never attended a school festival before. In response to her request, Leon suddenly asked Mylene to marry him, shocking everyone in the room with his audacity. The next moment, someone knocked him on the head, and when he turned around, he saw an angry Julius who threatened him to stay away from his mother. When Leon refused, Julius punched him into the waste bin and took his mother away before the shameless idiot got out. Once they were safely in his cafe, he warned his mother to stay away from Leon. But the woman was more interested in speaking with Marie. She demanded that Julius bring her over, but he refused, saying her attitude was a bit hostile. That statement pissed Mylene off even more, so she slammed her hand on the table and pointed out that their cafe's prices were absurd. She also demanded to know why he was still hanging out with Marie when he lost the duel, and Julius claimed he was only helping his friends out. His mother told him not to give her any stupid excuses and said she wouldn't leave without seeing Marie. Meanwhile, back in Leon's cafe, Carla came in, and after Olivia introduced her to Leon, Carla went down on one knee as she asked Leon to please save her family. Later, after Leon returned to his room, Luxan asked if he was certain he wanted to accept Carla's request. Leon said he didn't see why not since they had a few days off after the festival. The orb pointed out that Leon stood to gain nothing from helping Carla, and Leon said he was just doing it for the plot. He also didn't want Olivia to lose face since she'd taken it upon herself to act as an intermediary. The next day, Olivia and Angelica came across the poster for the airbike race happening on the last day of the festival. Jilk was one of the racers and the most favored to win, even though he was just a first year. Olivia was surprised that Leon hadn't signed up, and Angelica reminded her that the guy would rather place bets than race. This made them laugh, and Olivia said she hoped that Leon wouldn't develop a gambling addiction. As they walked away, they didn't notice Marie and Kyle at the front of the crowd. Mary said she couldn't wait to see Jilk win the race because the prize money would help them a lot. Kyle suggested that she place bets like everyone else, but Mary told him that she hated gambling. In her previous life, her ex-boyfriend was a gambling addict, and that left them in debt, so she was determined to earn her money through more reliable means. On the day of the race, Leon sat in a booth with his money and Luxan, who assured him that the people they placed bets on were sure winners. While he was cackling like an evil villain, Olivia and Angelica arrived, and Angelica advised him to practice humility. Leon claimed humility wouldn't get him anywhere, prompting Olivia to say that he one day lose his earnings. Of course, Leon didn't believe him and laughed even harder when those he bet on crossed the finish line. In the next round, Jilk took the lead, but then his opponents began ganging up on him, and this pissed Leon off, as he'd also bet on Jilk. Angelica figured those attacking Jilk were Claris's followers, and at that moment, Jilk was attacked again. However, he skillfully avoided them and crossed the finish line first, earning everyone's praise. It wasn't until he got to his station that they realized that he'd gotten hurt and couldn't race anymore. Later in his room, Mary mourned the loss of her prize money, and as Angelica tried to figure out who could replace him, Claris walked in with her servants and a guy named Dan. She didn't even sympathize with Jilk and told him that the attacks were just the beginning of his endless suffering at her hands because he'd broken off their engagement. Leon recalled that she'd been a model student in the game, but right now, she looked like a delinquent in training, and he seemed to dig it. When he called her a badass, Olivia scolded him for supporting violence, and he backed down. Angelica tried to convince Claris to drop her vendetta against Jilk, but that just pissed her off. When she told Jilk she would never forgive him, he promised to spend the rest of his life atoning for his sin. However, he warned that he wouldn't forgive her if she shifted her sights to Marie. At this, Claris turned to Marie, and the girl tried to play the innocent damsel card, only to get screamed at. As Leon watched them, he suddenly got a sense of deja vu because Mari was acting like his younger sister from his former life. After Clarice and her entourage left, Mari insisted that Leon take Jilk's place, and the boy asked if she was crazy. Mari assured him that she wasn't and revealed that Angelica would be in trouble if she didn't get a replacement for Jilk. She was on the executive committee, and failing to secure a first-year replacement could further damage her reputation. Angelica told Leon not to worry about it, but Leon didn't feel good knowing that she could get in trouble because of him, so he agreed. However, he made it very clear that Jilk would owe him for the favor, and the guy said he didn't mind. Shortly after, Leon went to get ready for the race, and while he was speaking to Luxian, Dan approached him. He told Leon that he intended to win the final race, and Leon asked if Clarice had threatened him. Dan explained that he genuinely adored Clarice and hated that, even though she did everything for Jilk, he dumped her by letter. Leon agreed that Jilk was a proper scumbag for doing that and voiced his support for having him beaten up. After Dan walked away, Luxian informed Leon that he'd modified his bike, and the boy said it was time for him to win because he bet a lot of money on himself. As soon as the race began, most of the racers tried to attack Leon because they had lost a lot of money after betting against him in the duel. Leon called them all sore losers and then maneuvered his way out of their trap, but that didn't stop the audience from booing him. Olivia and Angelica felt sorry for him, but then Stephanie showed up and said Leon deserved all the hate he got. She then tried to attack Angelica, so Olivia rushed to defend her friend and told Stephanie to back off. Because of that, Stephanie began insulting Olivia again and telling her how much Angelica had hated people like her. Unable to stand her harsh words, Olivia ran away, and that was when Angelica lost it. She attacked Stephanie without a second thought and had to be pulled off her when the beatdown escalated. Meanwhile, Leon decided to wrap things up on the track and activated the booster while Luxian had added to his bike. Unfortunately, after he crossed the finish line, his bike malfunctioned and exploded, but Dan caught him before he fell to his death. Later, Leon took the prize money and his earnings to gloat in Jilk's room, and Jilk asked how he wanted him to repay him. Surprisingly, Leon asked him to meet with Clarice and properly apologize for what he'd done. Clarice was so mad that she slapped him and asked why he couldn't love her, and Jilk admitted that he didn't know why. Dan got pissed at his response, but Clarice told him that Jilk wasn't worth the trouble. After Jilk left, Dan and Clarice thanked Leon for his help, and Clarice informed him of what had happened between Stephanie, Angelica, and Olivia. Leon then went to find them, and a sad Olivia asked if he thought she could truly be friends with Angelica. Leon admitted it would be hard because of who they were, then began badmouthing Angelica. Olivia immediately defended her, so Leon said their friendship would definitely weather the storm. After hearing this, Olivia said she would speak to Angelica, but before she could do that night, Carla came to speak with her. She said she wanted Olivia to get involved in the matter, and when Olivia tried to refuse, Stephanie suddenly showed up and said she didn't have a choice. She also threatened to hurt Angelica and Leon if Olivia didn't cooperate. Olivia argued that Leon and Angelica wouldn't take her threats too lightly, but Stephanie told her to go outside and touch some grass because Leon and Angelica were only toying with her. That statement crushed Olivia's fighting spirit, so she just sat there as Stephanie belittled her even more. The next day, while Leon was packing to embark on the trip to Carla's island to fight the pirates disturbing them, Luxian voiced his disapproval. He asked why Carla hadn't gone to the crown for help, and Leon said he'd taken the job for another reason. Apparently, aside from acquiring a harem, the protagonist needed to obtain 3 items to awaken her powers as a saint. The first was the holy bracelet hidden in the palace dungeon, the second, the holy necklace in the possession of the sky pirates, and the third was the holy staff being kept in the kingdom's temple. In the game, the encounter with the Sky Pirates didn't occur until 2.5 years after Olivia and the heirs met, and it was Stephanie who set everything up using Carla because she was extremely jealous of Olivia. However, the event had been moved up because of everything that had happened, and instead of asking Olivia to fight the pirates, Stephanie made sure Leon was the scapegoat. Luxian suggested having Olivia handle this quest as she did in the game, but Leon refused, saying she wasn't prepared for the hero lifestyle yet. Hearing this, Luxian pointed out that Leon's actions made him one of Olivia's love interests, but the boy didn't believe it since he was a mob character. Later in the day, shortly after Leon and Luxian arrived at the port where his ship, Partner, was stationed, Carla arrived with Olivia. Leon noticed she looked sad, but before he could speak to her, Carla revealed that Greg and Brad were accompanying them as well. Of course, Leon wasn't happy to see the disgraced Power Rangers, and he didn't hide this fact as they flew to Carla's island. Carla apologized for not telling him in time, and Brad explained that he accepted the job because Carla served Stephanie, his ex-fiancée. Greg tagged along because he didn't want to be alone, since the rest of their friend group had been called back home. Meanwhile, back at the academy, Angelica went to Olivia's room, hoping to patch things up, only to find the door graffitied. As she began knocking, Stephanie showed up with her followers, trying to stir up trouble. When Angelica told her to buzz off, the girl stepped closer and revealed that she had sent Olivia to fight the Sky Pirates. Angelica's reaction was to grab Stephanie by the collar and then stare her minions down when they attempted to interfere. Stephanie demanded that she let go of her, but Angelica tightened her hold and told her that she would teach her a lesson for going after Olivia. However, the lesson had to wait because she needed to get to her friends before they got hurt. Back on the ship, Greg and Brad played a card game against Leon, but they lost because the guy was a professional cheater. Greg then asked Brad what kind of person Stephanie was, and he admitted that he'd only spoken to her a handful of times. Their engagement had been political since his family was charged with defending the border and hers with securing diplomatic ties with the kingdom's enemies. It was thanks to them that those at the border didn't have to worry about the Black Knight. Leon remembered the Black Knight was the strongest person in the neighboring Phanos dukedom, but aside from that, he disliked the guy because he'd unalived his character multiple times while he was playing the game. Returning to the conversation, Greg asked how Brad had called off his engagement to Stephanie, and Brad admitted there had been a big fight. Greg could relate to that, as he'd only met his ex-fiancée a few times. Leon began feeling sorry for them, but that didn't last as Lucian informed him that 2 pirate ships were approaching. He then informed the 2 pampered brats, got pissed at their clueless response, and told them to stay on the ship while he welcomed their guests. Meanwhile, on the pirate's ship, their commander informed them that Carla wasn't to be harmed. He assumed the fight would be a walk in the park, but then Leon showed up and taught them never to underestimate a Gen Z adult. Greg and Brad were equally surprised by Leon's skill and realized that they had seriously underestimated him during the duel. By the time Leon was done taking out the pirates in armor, their commander ordered the ships to retreat, but Leon unleashed his cannons on them. The missiles hit their target despite the magic barriers being up, so the commander immediately ordered his men to raise the white flag. Later, while Brad was tying up the pirates, Greg stood staring at him because it had finally dawned on him that he and his friends weren't truly prepared for real life and its struggles. As for Leon, Lucian asked why he hadn't just made the pirates walk the plank, and he replied that he wasn't that evil, even though he acknowledged that his decision might come back to bite him. Inside the ship, a panicked Carla tried to call her family to get them on board with her lie, but couldn't, so she decided to pin everything on Olivia. A few hours later, they arrived at her island, and the boys were immediately held at gunpoint. It wasn't until Carla's father arrived and recognized Brad that they stopped treating them like invaders. When the man asked why they had come, Leon replied that Carla had requested their assistance, but the girl claimed that it wasn't so. She tried to twist the story to make it look as though Olivia had set the whole thing up, but Leon defended Olivia. Carla's father tried to apologize on his daughter's behalf, but Leon told him that an apology wouldn't cut it, as they had risked their lives on the promise of a payment. At this, the man turned to his daughter and demanded an explanation, so she fell to her knees in tears. Later, after leaving the island, Leon pointed out how easily Carla snitched on Stephanie once he lied to her that the pirates had told him everything. Lucian commended him, saying he'd make a perfect bad cop, but then reminded him that he still had to speak to Olivia. Leon then went to her room, but even his jokes didn't lighten her mood. When he reached for her, she smacked his hand away and asked if there was a reason behind his niceness to her. Leon couldn't respond properly, so she began comparing herself to Angelica, saying she could never be like her. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, but what truly broke Leon was when she told him that she was nothing more than a pet to him and Angelica. Later, while Leon was on the deck with Lucian discussing what happened with Olivia, Brad came outside to practice his sword fighting. Curious, Leon asked why he wasn't practicing his magic since that was his strong point, and Brad answered that magic wouldn't be enough to defeat Leon. He also admitted that he wanted to get stronger so that his friend's strength and achievements would no longer overshadow him, and Mari would finally see his potential. At this, Leon asked what was so great about the bad-tempered Lolly, and Brad took offense. He claimed that Mari had a good heart, but Leon assured him that the girl's heart was as rotten as a spoiled apple. The next moment, one of the ship's bots brought wooden swords for them to settle their differences with a duel, and Brad happily accepted it. Leon wasn't so interested in fighting him, but Brad didn't give him a chance to opt out. As he struck Leon's sword, Leon asked why he'd chosen to fight with his weakest skill, and Brad screamed that it was because he wanted to be proud of who he was when he faced Mari. His words made Leon realize that even though Julius and his friends were airheads, their actions were all in Mari's best interest. Unlike him, who had approached Olivia because of who she was, so he quickly disarmed Brad, and after the guy walked off, Lucian reappeared. Leon didn't even scold him for setting up the duel, and said he wished the efforts Julius and his friends were making were for Olivia, not that ungrateful Mari. Speaking of Mari, she and Kyle were currently being chased by a monster because she was determined to get her hands on the holy items and steal Olivia's spot as the Signant. The next day, Leon and the boys were having breakfast when Lucian informed them that the main forces of the Sky Pirates had come looking for beef. Greg and Brad insisted that he let them fight alongside him, saying they could use the armor they had confiscated from the pirates they had captured. Leon wanted to refuse, but when he saw that they had swallowed their pride and bowed, he changed his mind. At the same time, Olivia was in her room, regretting how she had spoken to Leon the previous day. However, her sad girl arc was cut short when the pirates opened fire on Partner. She immediately rushed out, as though she could do anything to help with the fight. When the ship's bots tried to stop her, she screamed at them to move out of the way, and surprisingly, they did. The moment she stepped onto the deck, a red armor dropped in front of her and tried to take her, but Brad arrived just in time to save her. Unfortunately, the red armor was stronger, and he slammed him down out of annoyance. During this time, Leon was mercilessly taking down the pirates, and when Luxtion confirmed that the pirate boss had gone after Olivia, he panicked. However, he relaxed slightly after seeing that Brad and Greg were there to defend. It also reminded him that he wasn't the one meant to be by her side, but since he had grown attached to her, he still swooped down and took down the boss. While he was toying with the guy, he spotted the holy necklace, so he took it and flicked the guy across the deck as if he were an unwanted Lego piece. After that, the remaining pirates surrendered, and Olivia used her healing magic on Brad. He was surprised to see that she could use the same type of magic as Mary, but he was too tired and fell unconscious before he could tell her more. Just then, Leon came up behind Olivia and said that she and Brad would make a great couple. Olivia tried to ask what he meant, but then Greg showed up, and Leon switched his attention to him, saying he'd done well. He then asked for his help to move Brad inside, explaining that Olivia had healed him with her magic. As they walked away, Olivia couldn't help but cry because Leon hadn't called her Livia as he usually did, which created a gap between them. Later, as Leon admired the loot he took from the pirates, Luxtion informed him that he found the evidence linking Stephanie and her family to the pirates. They also talked about Olivia, and Leon said it was time for him to return to his rightful place as a plot extra. Just then, Angelica's family airship pulled up beside them, so Leon went out to welcome them. The next day, Greg and Brad grew pissed when they learned that they were being given the reward money for capturing the pirates. When they argued that they hadn't done anything, the guy informed them that Leon had reported otherwise. He also said that Leon had appealed to their families to reconsider their disinheritance because of it, leaving both boys speechless. Later, Luxtion asked Leon if he was sure about his decision to help Greg and Brad regain their positions, and Leon assured him it was the right thing to do. As for Stephanie, the royal family delivered her punishment, but even though he'd sorted out that issue, Angelica was pissed with him because he refused to explain what happened with Olivia. Leon claimed he was okay with it as he intended to distance himself from her as well. However, just like both girls, he wasn't happy with the sudden change in their relationship. The next day, Greg and Brad asked Julius to help them set up a meeting with the Queen because they wanted to repay Leon for what he'd done for them. So, a few days later, when Leon received the notice that he had been promoted to a higher rank, he almost went crazy because it was 2 ranks above his father's. But the shock wasn't over, as Clarice's father sent him a letter thanking him for helping his daughter and informing him that he'd recommended him for another rank upgrade after his graduation. The boy could only cry in frustration while Luxtion teased him about how he was even further away from being a regular background character. The following week, after Daniel and Raymond congratulated a depressed Leon on his rank upgrade, they began talking about the upcoming school trip. Leon recalled that, in the game, the trip was an event meant to strengthen the bond between the protagonist and her love rivals, and since he knew which island each boy would be on, he decided to go to the one without them. Daniel asked whether he would team up with Olivia and Angelica, and when he didn't respond, Raymond advised him to make up with them already. On the day they left for the trip, Leon noticed Olivia standing alone while Angelica was surrounded by those who still respected her. As he looked around some more, he spotted Chris in the middle of a group of thirsty females and got pissed. First, because he blamed him and his friends for his inability to bag girls, and second, because he wished the dumb guys would give Olivia the attention they ought to. Meanwhile, Angelica's fake friends were in another part of the ship, discussing how they were going to cut ties with her since she was no longer useful to them. They also had a smoke device in their hand, which someone had instructed them to activate and throw out the window. Later on, after they arrived at their location, everyone went about enjoying the island's festival, but Olivia just stood there feeling lonely. She wished Leon and Angelica were with her, but she shook the thought away before heading to the shrine to be alone. Coincidentally, Leon and Angelica also had the same idea, and they couldn't leave because one of the shrine maidens urged them to come in and pray. The shrine was dedicated to marriage, so Leon began praying loudly for a good spouse. However, when the girls realized he was praying for a freaky sugar mommy, Angelica smacked him on the head, warning him not to desecrate the holy place with his culturedness. Eventually, he got serious, and as they stood praying, he wondered what kind of spouses the girls prayed for. After their prayer, the maiden gave them charms, and Leon grew excited because he'd spent a lot of money to ensure that he came to that island. The girls didn't understand why he was hung up on the charms, and when the maiden pointed out that it was 1 charm per person, they told Leon he could keep theirs. However, he decided not to be greedy and shared it with them. When they opened it, the girls saw that they had received elemental charms, while Leon had received the War Fortune charm, an item that enhanced close combat abilities and physical attributes. His reaction to it prompted the shrine maiden to ask whether he was a fan of charms, and Leon answered that he was, so she told them that they could visit whenever and collect more. Suddenly, she asked whether they had prayed for their friendship, and the trio immediately slipped into an awkward silence. The next day, on the trip back to the academy, Luxtion asked Leon why he hadn't gone into the dungeon to retrieve the holy bracelet yet. Leon explained that going in without a proper plan was risky and said he believed Mary was thinking along the same lines. Just then, Chris approached him and challenged him to a sword fight, but Leon turned him down. The next moment, the ship's alarms went off, and when the boys looked over the railing, they saw that monsters were approaching the ship. However, they were being led by the Phanos Dukedom's warships, which confused Leon, since the war wasn't supposed to start until they were in their 3rd year. Worst of all, their princess was with them, and she ordered the the students to surrender or face the Grim Reaper. So when her people bothered the students' ship, Angelica offered to be taken away since she was the daughter of a duke. Leon tried to stop her, but his classmates tackled him to the floor, and when he kept struggling, the enemy commander ordered them to beat him up. The students didn't hesitate to comply, and even when Angelica pleaded with them to stop, nobody listened. As she was taken away, Olivia tried to go after her, but she was also restrained and slapped. Leon cursed his classmates for doing that, but then they knocked him out with a kick. Later on the Phanos warship, Angelica asked Princess Gertrude why she had declared war on their kingdom, but she refused to say anything. Instead, she informed her that she would get rid of the remaining students. Angelica was shocked and asked why she'd do that when she had already taken her hostage. Gertrude assured her that the students dying wouldn't be a big loss because they were all self-centered brats. Back on the students' ship, Leon was locked up, and Olivia sat outside his cell crying and blaming herself for being too weak to help Angelica. Leon didn't say much, since he didn't know how to handle crying women. However, Chris suddenly showed up and asked Leon to help him buy time so their classmates could escape. Leon refused, saying he wasn't going to risk his life for a group of spineless cowards, but he eventually changed his mind and told Chris that he'd fight if the rest of the students joined them. Following this, Chris tried to appeal to their classmates to fight, but they told him to shut up and stop acting like he was still relevant. At this, Leon fired a shot into the air and used his authority as a lower fifth knight to order them to join the fight. Of course, they all protested, and as their complaints grew louder, he called them fake nobles. That pissed off a girl named Deirdre, and she called him an upstart. Leon didn't deny it, but he did point out that he was the only one with a real title and the only one who was a successful adventurer. He didn't stop there and called the entire student body hypocrites because they had all been relieved when Angelica surrendered herself, but now they were calling her all sorts of names and even refusing to fight for their own freedom because their sense of entitlement was very high. He also said their ancestors would be ashamed to see what they had become. Deirdre laughed in his face and said he was delusional if he thought he could fight the enemy's monster fleet. However, she told him not to underestimate their power, and Leon smirked because his plan had worked perfectly. That's all for now. But do you think Marie would achieve her goals, or would Leon keep ruining them like he's been doing? If you want to find out, comment next. Also, check out this next video.